Bishop, thank you so much for making some time to talk in a very complex time in our culture. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I think I'm doing probably like everybody else is doing in this country. I think I'm a little bit shell-shocked, to be honest with you, between dealing with the coronavirus, between dealing with the powers of the pandemic and the economic impact that it's had on our community and on the country and on the world, quite frankly. That on top of the recent series of injustices and murders and killings is pretty much a lethal concoction to ingest emotionally.
I'm gonna jump right in, Bishop, because we're in the fire as we speak. Literally, we are hurt, we are angry, we are frustrated. In many senses, we are violent,
right?
Visceral. What do you say to this moment?
We all have those feelings. We all have everything you named. I feel that too. Everybody feels that has any sense about this, and even black and white. It seems to be crossing the color line. I've never seen as many white pastors speaking up and speaking out about this kind of thing as I'm starting to see now, which is very.
You're seeing white pastors speaking.
Yes. Stephen Furtick, Judah. Pastor Judah, many others are starting to say things about it that really need to be heard. My pastor friend out of Seattle, Washington, Rick Warren, have all weighed in on it, and countless others are starting to say things, which is very unusual, incidentally. And I think people are finding their voice. I'm hoping that this is the tipping point where America, not just Black America, begins to recognize that there is huge legitimacy to the allegations that we have been making for years and years and years, that we're not race baiting, that we're not whining, but we are dying, and we're dying in an unfair, unjust society by people who are being paid out of our tax dollars to represent us and protect us, and instead they're killing us. I think they also need to understand that we're not asking for exemption from the law. We're not asking for a special pass because we're Black. What we're asking for is not to be judged and adjudicated on the sidewalk. What we're asking for is for due process of law. What we're asking for is to be treated with the same fairness and justice that they allocate to other people. The thing that gets me most about it is that whenever we bring up these discussions, many of my friends will come along and say, don't judge anything off the video footage. Don't be so quick to react to it. Let it go through due process and the investigation and all of that. And I'm wondering, where is that patience when that guy had his knee on the brother's neck? Let's have some patience there. Let's have some due process there. Let's have some calmness there in due process of law. So it can't be this inequity where when we are angry, we're told to just wait, everything's going to be all right. And then when this individual is angry, they can shoot us down for jogging. And it's okay that they're free for weeks and weeks and weeks and they haven't been arrested. It's not okay. It's not okay.
You mentioned that our white brothers and sisters are speaking. I've been saying on my social media and to my white brothers and sisters, my friends, that it's important that they speak up, speak out, to be bold and courageous, and to stand up against their white counterparts,
right.
That are undeniably racist, or moments where you see what happened to George Floyd. And the list is so long. We can call so many names that this has happened to. But in this moment, with George Floyd in particular, notwithstanding Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and all of the others, but to have his knee on his neck for almost 10 minutes over a forgery accusation, and I remember the killing in South Carolina of the 9 beautiful people who were worshiping in church, and the white guy who killed them in cold blood, he walked away, and then they took him to Burger King.
Right.
There's so many stark examples in our culture. Why do you think it's important that our white brothers and sisters and those that are in seats of power and influence with voices speak to this moment beyond just those of us that are black and brown?
You know, we often think about this in white and black, white, black, and brown, but we also need to think about it in white, black, brown, and blue. Because some of the injustices occur even when the person who is black is wearing blue. There is such a fraternity amongst police officers that they often lose sight of their own culture and their own background in the heat of the moment. And we have seen cases where there have been black officers present who did not act any differently than the white officers did. And so I think we have to understand the blue part of it and get down to the fact that, one, we have unions that have too much power, that control the narrative, that has to be addressed with the police unions. Then we have to deal with the police stations and the funding for the police departments on a local level. There needs to be a federal mandate put in place that you're no longer eligible for federal fundings if you don't live up to certain standards. That would put it to an end, because green trumps blue, black, brown, and white. And if we get a hold to the purse and begin to say, if you're going to get funding, you have to live up to a certain standard and a certain accountability, that would be very, very helpful. So those conversations need to be had, especially as we come close to an election. Who is going to deliver on that? We've made some strides with the criminal justice system. We've made some strides as it relates to federal prisons. It did not trickle down to the state level, but it needs to trickle down there where we get more equity in those places. Right now, we have brothers right now locked up in prison in the middle of a pandemic who are getting sick, who are dying, who cannot distance themselves, who are not given PPE or proper equipment. And it's not just the inmates, it's also the caretakers. And we're treating people of all walks of life like they're second-class citizens and like they don't matter, and that has to be eradicated.
We feel like, Bishop, this is a bad movie that keeps running. And it keeps happening. Either in most cases, the officers are not prosecuted, or like in Chicago, in the case of Laquan McDonald, the sentence is minimal. Mm-hmm. And so, there's so many of us, and I say us because I include me in this moment, right, that feel like if justice is not going to be given, then we're gonna take it. Yeah. And what do you say to the people who want to be violent, or, as the quote, Dr. King's quote, rioting is the language of the unheard. Mm-hmm. And so people feeling like, okay, we know the word, right? We know it can't be an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, and all that kind of stuff. But you feel like you have been diplomatic and you have been, you followed the legal rules of how to approach a situation. You have dotted your I's, crossed your T's, you've done the legal process, you have protested peacefully. And then you start to feel like Malcolm X. Yeah. By any means necessary. What are you saying?
Yeah, you do feel like that, but that's exactly what the enemy wants, because that's going to result with more bloodshed, more dead people, more people incarcerated, more men stripped away from their families, more mothers visiting their sons in jail, more women left to raise their children by themselves. That is not the answer. This case has been tried in my generation. So for your generation to retake this test between nonviolence and violence, we already tried that in the 60s. We already burned down communities. We already set places on fire. We already started shooting in the street. That did not work. And we feel like we've tried everything, but we have not. If we would vote like we tweet, That would make a big difference. If we would vote in the local level and not just on a national level, that would make a big difference. If we would hold our elected officials accountable, that would make a big difference. If we would vote their hips out of office, if they are unjust and inhumane to us, that would make a big difference. We don't need more tweets, we need more votes. And when you do tweet, we need to be tweeting the senators in that area. We need to be tweeting the DA in that area. What we're doing is fussing amongst ourselves, getting angry with each other, frustrated because this one didn't stand enough. We're picking on each other when we need to be picking on the people who have the power to really get something done. And we don't understand that power. We think that because somebody is a gospel artist, they have power with the court, or because they're a preacher, they have power with the president. That's not always true. The reality is our collective power is where our strength is. Not in one individual, not in the rich folks, not in the talented folks, not in the people that are on TV. Our collective power as a people, if we ever learn to use that correctly, I think we'll see a real change and we'll be taken seriously.
It's so profound, and Bishop, you know, you are absolutely right, especially, and we know it, you know, sometimes I think our emotions overtake our cognition and we want to do something, right?
But
sometimes.
Let me show you something.
Yes,
this is systemic racism. This is not just racism, this is systemic injustice. And
I'm taking notes.
If you're going to fight a systemic problem, you have to have a strategy that is systemic. You cannot fight a systemic problem with an emotional reaction. You have to work the system. And so we have to get in the system. We're starting to run for office more. We've got more elected officials than we've ever had. We need to lay on those elected officials and hold them accountable. And not just the Black ones. You don't have to be Black to be on my side. You just have to be for right. And because we talk about it in terms of color, it gives a misnomer that all white people think a certain way and all Black people think a certain way, which is not true. There are many white people that are allies with us. In Charlottesville, for example, it was a white woman that died. It wasn't Black people. A lot of white demonstrators out there. We don't want to alienate that support. We want to invite that support to come in and join in with us and create a coalition that is all colors, to borrow from Jesse Jackson, a rainbow coalition of all different colors of people who are committed to a cause, not a color. And that cause is justice. Democracy is at stake here. Our enemies are looking at us and they are capitalizing on our vulnerabilities. They're capitalizing on our disunity. I would remind you that the fall of the Roman Empire was a result of internal corruption. And we're standing on the cusp of the same proclivities that existed in Rome that caused the fall of the Roman Empire. We need to unite, not divide. We need to collect. We need to multiply, not subtract. We need to be connected in such a systemic way and that we get things done. But the problem is we've given up on the system. But we've given up a system that we haven't engaged in. We need young voters. We need passionate voters. We need that passion. We need that commitment, but we need it at the ballot box. And in between time, we need you writing to the DA. We need you writing to the elected officials. We need to make certain demands that the police officers be treated with the same sort of fairness and come together and develop a policy that these things are going to happen, unfortunately. It's like child abuse, it's like domestic violence. Anytime you have a big organization, somebody's going to go rogue. We will never be able to stop people from going rogue. I can't stop it in my church. I can't stop it in my family. I can't stop it in my neighborhood. People are going to go rogue. They have mental problems. They have emotional problems. They're going to go rogue. We know that. But when they do go rogue, we need to know that we have a criminal justice system that works as effectively on blue as it does on Black.
No, and I'm taking notes over here. Bishop, as you drop hand grenades to empower us in the middle of a really chaotic time. So there are lots of entities and organizations out here that are doing great work. Until Freedom, Tamika Mallory, Sean King, Grassroots Law, Lee Merritt, Attorney Crump, and tons of other people, NAACP, Urban League, National Action Network, Rainbow Coalition that you mentioned, and tons of others. Speak about the church. Where should the church sit? There are lots of amazing people doing amazing things, but speak to the church, Bishop, in this moment.
I think that this is a moment that the church as a whole has to say enough, okay? That this is too far. This is a bridge too far. And we need to use our platform. The church is a platform to influence a lot of people, almost media, if you will. And so to perpetuate a message where we give marching orders to masses of people how to respond, our people don't know what to do. And so when they don't know what to do, they get angry and they just start doing anything. We need command stations to say, this is how we're going to fight, this is what we're going to do, and this is who we're going to write this week, and this is who we're going to speak to this week, and this is who we are going to support. And we need to hold elected officials, again, accountable, regardless to whether they're Democrat or Republican. Sometimes we're more loyal to the party than we are to our own people. What we really need to do is hold people accountable. What is your plan for Black America? What is your plan for the criminal justice system? What is your plan when police officers go rogue? We need to ask those questions, get those answers, and hold them accountable to what they promise us. We pay attention to the presidential election. We don't pay attention to the district attorney. We don't pay attention to who the mayor is. We don't get down into the trenches of our cities, and that's where all hell is breaking loose. Not to say that we don't have hell breaking loose in other areas, but when we get down to this level, it is those DAs and those mayors and those elected officials sometimes that we don't even come out to vote for one way or the other, or just blindly vote our party. We're not really being strategic in aligning our forces. When you're a minority, and we're 13, 14% of the population, represent about 40 million people out of 360 million people or so in the United States, you have to be strategic in order to have impact. We don't need to divide. We don't need to start yelling at the clergy and fussing at this one and fussing at that one and saying, you need to do this, you need to do that. We need not to divide, but we need to multiply. We want everybody together. When you ask me about the role that the church should play, it should be as unique as the persons that helm them. Some of them need to pick up the phone and call somebody. Others need to get a sign and go march. Some people need to run for office. It depends on what your gifts are as a clergyman, what you bring to the table, but all of it is valuable. We can't all do the same thing and be effective, but we can want the same thing and approach it from different perspectives. That's my view of it.
No, I love it, Bishop. I think you say every time you give a sentence, it's a suitcase. It's a whole lot in it. It can all be unpacked. I think too, Bishop, and you said it when you said the whole church, mm-hmm. the entire body of Christ. And I think I'm not enough of what you've said, and that is, it's not a question of black or white, it's a question of right or wrong. Right. It's a kingdom question.
Right.
Justice is in the Bible just like love is.
Right.
Just like salvation is. And I think sometimes we water down or we negate or neglect that word in scripture. And I think, as you said, the whole church, in my mind, I just saw, the broad tapestry of the body.
Right.
And everything that encompasses.
I think in the Black church in particular, there is a feeling of not being empowered. We're working often in impoverished areas. We're working with substandard connections and relationships. We don't have the kind of influences and relationships as some of the white clergy do. And I think we're also discouraged by the fact that the white clergy as a whole have a tendency when it comes to politics to focus on just a couple of issues. They have not embraced social justice as a part of those issues. This is about human rights. We often say cliches like, "What would Jesus do?" If Jesus was standing out there when that police officer placed his knee on that young man's neck, and all of a sudden George is laying there and his nose is bleeding and he's crying for his mother, what would Jesus do? He would not look the other way. And the problem with the church right now is that when you look at the parable of the Good Samaritan, where a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, fell amongst thieves, stripped him, wounded him, left him half dead. Then the Bible says the Levite came and looked at him and passed by on the other side. The Levite did that. The priest came by, looked at him, passed by on the other side. Those first two visits we never preach about. We always preach about the Good Samaritan who poured in the oil and the wine, but we overlook those two first visits, who saw but chose to be blind. And the problem with the church today is that we read about it, and if it doesn't affect us personally, if it's not in our congregation, if it's not in our sphere of influence, we look at it and we pass by on the other side. So in the Samaritan story, much of the church has been functioning like the Levite and the priest. We watch it on the news or we read it in the paper and we say, it doesn't have anything to do with me, and we pass by on the other side. And I think Jesus' pointing to the fact that the priest and the Levite pass by on the other side brings to clarity how religion has a tendency to be verbal, but in crisis to be blind. And the audacity of the text is that the least likely person, the Samaritans and the Jews had no dealings with each other, was the very person that came to rescue them. And Jesus was breaking all stereotypes when he was teaching who your neighbor is. That text right there is the substratum of the theology that should embrace the circumstance, because we must redefine who our neighbor is. Our neighbor should not be determined by zip codes or colors of skins or what school you went to or anything like that. Jesus is saying people that you historically had no dealings with may end up being the one who pours in the oil and the wine quicker than the people that exist within your religious sphere. The Levite and the priest were highly respected in their religious sphere, but when it came to crisis, they ignored them.
No, that should invoke a degree of conviction.
Yeah.
It's gripping, as you described that. I think on multiple levels, Bishop, from an inspirational note, I want to say, how do people rise from the place of anger and despair to a place of productivity and purposefulness?
One of the things that we're dealing with, and one of the things that makes it so horrifying to me, is that this is the perfect storm. You have a people who are disproportionately losing their jobs, Black and brown people, disproportionately losing their jobs because of the types of service-oriented jobs that we have a tendency to occupy. Those are the first jobs to go. I'm not saying that we're losing them because we're Black. It just so happens that Black and brown people work in an environment where they are doing those types of services that are not coming back as quickly or as readily as we had hoped for them to. So you have the trauma, the utter trauma of not being able to take care of your family. A lot has been done. Thank God for the PPP. More needs to be done. It needs to reach more people. It needs to reach more people by having more elasticity to the policy to accommodate small minority sole proprietorships that really, frankly, have not done business well or don't have access to the types of accountants to be able to work through the maze of paperwork and to get to the PPPs and that sort of thing. Be that as it may, we have a lot of people who are dealing with that. Then you have these people who have been in isolation for 2 months in the house, okay, quarantined, off by themselves, which has already been proven to be to create deterioration to the emotional stability of anybody who's locked up in the house alone. When we finally start getting out of the house, we walk into these murders. Look at that. That is the perfect storm for everybody to overreact and explode in a way that's detrimental, right on the heels of an election. And with all of that going on at the same time simultaneously, the stress levels are so high.
Yes,
people are not rational. Emotional health is deteriorating. Suicide rates are up. Domestic violence is increasing before this happened. Now you add this on top of that, and what you're dealing with is trauma on the level of PTSD. There's going to be a traumatic emotional fallout from this era of history that will last God knows how long. And we keep taking blow after blow after blow after blow. And I'm concerned about where it's going to land us. When you start talking about where the church's role should be, if we don't march, and God bless the people that do, if we don't march, if we don't tweet, if we don't text, if we don't do anything but nurse our people's mental and emotional health back to wellness, that alone is a big job, because we don't go see therapists. Church is our therapy, and that is a problem because now we can't go to church. So we're having to get it online. So we're getting cyber ministry. Thank God for it. I'm streaming. I'm doing it too. It's better than no ministry at all. You're doing it too. But we're also doing helplines for people who are in crisis. We're also providing counseling service. We're also doing prayer lines for people that are in crisis. We're doing a lot of things to try to subsidize the fact that we don't have access to good health care physically, much less emotionally. There's no money for therapy. We're trying to make money for groceries. So you can't go pay $300 an hour to a therapist to lay down on the couch and tell them how you were when you got potty trained. So consequently, we ingest all of that. We internalize that, and we self-medicate through drugs, through liquor, through sex, through all kinds of ways. We self-medicate. That's getting worse right now. And so right now, the church has its hands full, keeping people stable, keeping people emotional. We pastor people who are bipolar. We pastor people who are chronically depressive. We pastor people who are schizophrenic. We pastor people who have Alzheimer's. We pastor all those people. And if you are a good pastor, you're doing all you can do to kind of keep them stable. How you doing today? Personally calling them, reaching out to them, trying to help them to just hold up another week. That's some of the things we're facing. And then when you turn on the TV and all you can see is this man just laying there on the ground, bleeding on the ground, calling for his mother. I think it's devastating. It was devastating to me. It's hard for me to talk about. I didn't want to see it. I had to look at it, but I didn't want to see it because it was devastating. That could be my son. That could be me. That could be you. It hurts. It really, really hurts. And people were asking me to make a statement, and I couldn't talk. I couldn't talk. I couldn't talk. I couldn't breathe. Wow. It's down there really deep. And it took me a minute to get myself together because I have children and I have family, and I'm a Black man in America. Before I'm a preacher or a pastor or anything else, I'm a Black man in America. White people don't understand that. They're going to criticize that when they hear me say that. But Black people understand we have a different drumbeat. We have a different journey, and we have a different path. And if I wanted to forget that I was a Black man in America, Every time you lock a car door when I walk past, reminds me I'm a black man in America. Every time I go in Neiman Marcus and you follow me around in the store, it reminds me that I'm a black man in America. Every time I see blue lights flashing behind me and my heart jumps up into my throat, it reminds me that I'm a black man in America. And every time my children call me and they've been pulled over, my son had a car wreck the other day. He had a car wreck and he called me at midnight. And he said, Daddy, he said, I'm out in the middle of the road and my car is wrecked. And he said, it doesn't look good and the ambulance is here and the police are here. And I asked him, first thing I asked him is, are you okay? And he said, yeah, I think I'm okay. I was more afraid of the police than I was the wreck.
Wow.
I was more afraid. I said, stay on the phone with me. I was listening to the police officer talking to him, and the police officer was very professional. And the more he was professional, the more I relaxed. I can get another car, okay? I can get another car. I can't get another kid. But to live in a world where you're more afraid of the police than you are the wreck,
right?
Only black people understand what that means.
Right, right. No, I mean, everything you said, I've seen it 2 times, and no matter how much education we have, no matter how many titles, roles, responsibilities, no matter how many people we help, we care for, it's like it will never matter. At least it feels like that, being pulled over myself and then asking, what was I pulled over for? And because of my roles and at points in Chicago, they run my tags and I don't know what comes up, but they say, get out of here, have a good day. What did I get pulled over for?
Yeah.
It to get pulled over for no reason repeatedly. And to have my young daughters ask me the other night, we were going for a family ride to get out and get some air, get some shaved ice and all that kind of thing, and just get some air. And before we pulled off to hear my oldest say, Daddy, what are we supposed to do if you get pulled over? Like, is there some things we're supposed to know? What are we supposed to do? With terror in her eyes, and then my other daughter chimed in, yeah, Daddy, what are we supposed to do? And it's like, I was speechless. And to calm them down, I had to say, Daddy's not gonna get pulled off. Daddy's not gonna get pulled off. Y'all relax. Yeah, but Daddy's not gonna get pulled off. And so to live in that kind of America, and I love America. I don't love some of the policies. I don't love the way some people act, handle, treat, but I love America.
America at its core is a concept. It's not a landmass. It's not a territory. What makes America unique is its concept, its ideals, its principles. And though we have never fully lived up to those principles have been the guiding compass that has distinguished us from other countries in the world. The fact that we have a constitution that guarantees us inalienable rights. The idea of America is what we love. The reality of it is what we grapple with. We have to close the gap between the ideal and the reality, and we must do that together.
Yes, sir. Yes,
we
sir.
must do that together. The ideal is worth the fight. Too many of our ancestors, black and white and brown, have shed their blood and died for the idea of this country.
Right.
And I this is my home.
Right.
And I absolutely love it, and I absolutely care about it, and I absolutely honor it, and I appreciate it, and I love, I go to Africa all the time. I love Africa. It's the home of my ancestors and all that. But I was born in America.
Yes, sir.
And I was born up under the umbrella of an idea that promised me life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It didn't give it to me, yes, sir, but it promised it to me.
Yes, sir.
I celebrate Independence Day, and I always feel funny when I do it because I wasn't independent on that day.
Yes, sir.
But that's okay. I eventually became independent.
Yes, sir.
My Independence Day came much later.
Yes, sir.
And yet the ideal, the grasping, the reaching, the groping toward the ideal is what causes planes to land and ships to come to our borders, because everybody has loved the ideal of America. It is that ideal that must be corrected. And we cannot correct that by burning down buildings, and we cannot correct that by shooting each other. We cannot correct it by allowing racism to move into positions of power and influence and act like we don't see it because it doesn't affect us.
Yes, sir. Yes,
because if it destroys any of us, it destroys all of us, because the ideal encompasses and protects all of us. That's why people of every tongue and kindred came to this country, sailed to this country, to be up under the umbrella of an ideal that is corroding right in front of our eyes.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I'm passionate about
you blessing me and everybody else.
You know, I'm just passionate about that, and the blood of my ancestors is in this soil.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Even with no rights and with no treatment, and even treated like slaves and beaten like dogs, and left out in dog houses to live. My great-grandmother was a slave, and I remember her. It was not that long ago. Even in spite of the atrocities of slavery, still I rise, as Maya Angelou would say, still I rise, and still I rise up, and still I put my hand over my chest, and still I pray, and still I pay my taxes, and still I obey the laws of the land, and still I pull over when the police officer says pull over, and put your hands out, give me your registration. I still do all of that. I taught my children to do all of that. But there is nothing that we have told our children to do in a crisis that has worked. We have seen people who kept their hands on the steering wheel, who were polite, and they still got shot. I don't know what to teach that works. That means that the reality has slid so far from the ideal that the reality is a foreigner and an immigrant to the ideal.
Yes, sir.
And there has to be a closing of that gap. This is not about black, white, and brown alone. It is also about red, white, and blue.
Right, right. Well, I think that's is so profound, Bishop, because what I'm seeing the mayor of Minneapolis,
yes,
doing,
yes.
Calling for prosecution charges against these officers.
Mm-hmm.
I think we don't see enough of that from the people who sit in the seats. And I applaud that mayor for the courage and the guts, to be quite frank, to say right is right, wrong is wrong, even if I got to stand against my own kind, as it were,
right,
who stand across the aisle or sit across the aisle. And so, you know, as you speak to closing the gap, in my mind, when you say the gap is going to be closed by people who are sitting in those, because in my mind, we're marching, we praying, we calling, I know in Chicago, there was an instance that I was working with a gentleman at our place, an amazing guy. We shut the courtroom down. I mean, there are demonstrations, there are all kinds of stuff people see, people don't see, but we're not seeing the tide turn. It keeps happening. And so would you say that the ground, there's plenty of groundwork, but it's in these back rooms and offices?
Let's dismiss the naivety that it keeps happening as if this is breaking news.
As if it never stopped happening.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It never stopped happening. We just didn't have iPhones. It never stopped happening. It's always been happening. It was happening when I was a child. It was happening every time we drove from West Virginia to Mississippi. It was happening way back then in the 60s. It's always been happening. It's always been there, but it's never been captured. And even in this particular case, had somebody not caught it on a camera, the police report would have indicated a falsehood, a lie, an absolute lie that they had to amend it. We have been dealing with this for years. And there is a naivety because, and I understand why there is a naivety in the white community. It's because that is not their experience. They do see the police and they always see them as help. And a lot of times they really are helping. There are a lot of great police officers. I have a lot of black and white police officers that go to my church that are great people. There are a lot of great police officers. But the reason the white community, one of the reasons they have trouble seeing it is that they don't see it. It doesn't happen to their children. It doesn't happen to their daughter. So they can't believe that the gap would be that wide. And there is a blindness to it, and sometimes a willing blindness. That we can be an eyewitness and still have to fight for our right to be heard. But I think, Pastor, that this is no different than what women have gone through. Women have fought through the ranks to be heard. And finally, women have come to a point now where they have credibility. For years, women were raped and not believed. For years, women were molested. 1 in 5 in this country molested between the ages of 5 and 15. For years, then it dropped to 1 in 3. For years in this country, and not believed, not even by their own parents. What America must realize is that the trauma that happens on the sidewalk, where we are tried on the street rather than in a court, is horrific enough. But what adds insult to injury is when you are a victim and nobody believes you. And women are just now beginning to be believed, and it took hundreds of years for women to be believed, because when you stand up and you argue down the victim and you blame the victim and they do the same thing, every case they're going to dig up something this boy did, something that happened in his life. He ran a red light, he smoked a joint, he did something. So you murdered him? So that means you can murder him? He took a cigar, he stole a cigar, so you get to murder him?
Yes, sir. Death penalty.
Come on, let's weigh this out a little bit, okay? That when I deal with victims of molestation, as bad as the molestation is, more times than not, what they are more damaged when they are not believed. And because we have been victimized and denied truth, the truth is what sets you free. The truth, you should know the truth, and the truth should set you free. And the trauma of not being believed has left us speechless. And I hated to watch him. I'm scared to talk about it again because I get emotional, but I hated to watch him because when he said he couldn't breathe, I didn't think I could either.
Me neither.
Yeah, I couldn't breathe either.
And watching him drive his knee, like he was pushing his knee down in his neck with his hand in his pocket, occasionally looking up around. I mean, to not feel the rage, to want to come through the phone, really,
right?
To knock him off of it. I mean,
yeah,
it's unbelievable. I've heard stories of lynching. All these shootings are horrible, and it's all horrific. To watch almost 10 minutes, 9 minutes, whatever it was, it's just unbelievable. And to hear people who saw the video, white people in particular, and I got a lot of white friends. I love white people. I love all people. But to hear specifically white people say, don't rush to judgment. To see it and say, don't rush to judgment. An investigation has to take place. And I said to myself, to the police union or whatever the group was that said that specifically, if that was your white child down there with a knee in his neck, for what? And put him in the car, take him to the station.
He's handcuffed. He's down. You got police officers all around him. You're not threatened. You're not in danger. You cannot use the excuse, I feared for my life. You couldn't have feared for your life. He couldn't have done anything if you'd have got up off him altogether. He couldn't have stood up without help. Okay? But this don't rush to judgment. I want to weigh in on that. Don't rush to judgment. I'm with them. Don't rush to judgment. Let's not rush to judgment. I actually agree with the statement. I just wish they would have said that to the police officer because he rushed to judgment. That's who ought not to rush to judgment. Yeah, that's who ought not to rush to judgment. I am tired of people telling me don't rush to judgment while they rush to judgment. That's right. Tell that to the man who shot the boy jogging down the street. Don't rush to judgment. I agree with don't rush to judgment. You're just telling the wrong people. The people who need to be told don't rush to judgment are the people with the guns and the knees. Those are the people who rush to judgment and trial and execution on a sidewalk. And I find it very disturbing. I'm trying to find that more pastoral part of myself so this conversation will go better. But I'm
going fantastic.
I'm trying to get it to come up. It's down in there. It's like indigestion. I'm trying to get it to burp to come up because as my grandmother said, I'm tired now. I'm tired now. See, this don't rush to judgment is that willing blindness that I'm talking about of the Levite and the priest. Don't rush to judgment. You know, maybe he brought it on himself. Maybe that's why he's over there wounded and half dead and stripped. I'm not going to get involved with that. I'm just going to look at it and turn around and walk the other way. And that has gotten so old. But Dr. King said something that I loved. Truth smashed down to the ground will rise again undaunted. Smashed all the way down to the ground will rise again undaunted. It took a long time to find out what happened to Emmett Till, but it rose again undaunted. Sooner or later, truth will always rise up. And I want to encourage the people who are listening at this, that when you have truth and you have right on your side, right will always prevail over wrong. It may not be quick, it may not be speedily, it may be generational, but it will happen. I went to South Africa the first time I went to South Africa, and I told them, I said, I went out into Soweto and rented an outdoor coliseum, and I spoke out there to them. And I told them, I said, I would love to preach to you. I said, but I can't preach. I've only got one time to be with you. And I said, as the great grandson of a slave, I had to come and tell you about what our struggle was like. They were 7 years from the apartheid. And I told them, I said, I come representing your great-great-grandchildren, the ones you will never see or never meet. And I came to tell you that the struggle was worth it. Because change is generational. You understand what I'm saying? And you may not see in your lifetime the full benefit. And there were people there with their legs cut off, fighting for freedom. There were people there whose arms had been hacked off, fighting for freedom. And as they stood there with their shirt sleeves dangling and no arm in their shirt sleeve and hopping on one leg, I said, we came through slavery and you came through the apartheid, but I'll meet you at the cross. I leaped down off the stage, because back then I was young enough to leap. I leaped down off the stage and come walking through the mud in the rain and made an altar call, and they met me in the middle of a field. And I started leading hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of people to Jesus. We have come through so much to be where we are right now. And that's why when we have victories and when we have accomplishments, that's why we must celebrate the good days. I have this motto, and I know we're running out of time, but I want to share this with you. Be sure you maximize your ecstasies. Enjoy them to the fullest. Live them to the utmost. Because you have to create your own ecstasies. Your miseries will find you on their own. And I am afraid that we miss our good days worrying about our bad ones.
Yes, sir. When I heard you say, celebrate, we must celebrate. Simultaneously in that, I heard that we must support so we can celebrate. Because we'll see somebody like you come out with a movie, and there are people that raise questions instead of support.
Yeah.
And I think all across the board, I think that's another gap we got to close in our community all across the board.
We've got to do better at it. We've got to do better at supporting one another. This is true. But let me take this opportunity to say that our people have been good to me.
Yeah.
And I absolutely adore them.
Yes, sir.
They supported my meetings. They came to my events. They bought my books. They did whatever they could. Old grandmas who I knew wasn't going to read the book.
Yes, sir.
I knew when she came up there, she wasn't going to read the book. Coming in wheelchairs.
Yes, sir.
And book signing lines.
Yes, sir.
To support. If Black people didn't ever support each other, you and I wouldn't be here.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And so I don't want to focus on the ones that don't. You always have naysayers. You always have haters. That's such as life. That's normal.
Yes, sir.
I want to clap for the people who ever did anything that helped any of us to be where we are today.
Yes, sir.
To me, that is also social justice.
Yes, sir.
And then we owe it to give something back. So that's why we have fed over 5,000 people in the pandemic. And that's why we've been handing out boxes of groceries to people who have lost their jobs. Because reciprocity is the key to survival. Yes. Give, and it shall be given unto you again, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. Yes. Shall men give unto thy bosom? Not God. Men give unto thy bosom. So it has been reciprocity that has caused us to go down to Katrina and snatch dead bodies out and pray with first responders. It's been reciprocity that's made us respond in the Bahamas when there was a crisis over there and the hurricanes had torn up the island. It has been reciprocity that caused us to dig wells in Africa for people who had no water. It has been reciprocity that has caused us to develop a STEM program for kids that are free, that they can watch online. All they have to do is go to TDJ Foundation, and this summer they can have a full STEM program, 1 hour, 4 hours a week, kids 5 through 16. They can access technology and be more ready for the jobs that are coming in the world. 80% of the jobs that are going to be left are going to be STEM jobs. I don't do that for money. I don't get any money. It's free. It's reciprocity.
Yes, sir.
It's reciprocity. And to everybody watching us, if it's baking cookies and carrying it over to an old lady who's shut up in her house and can't get out because of the pandemic, if it's going to the grocery store for your great grandmother to bring her back a gallon of milk, all of that is social justice too. It is not just militants and marching and fighting and holding up signs and picketing. It's helping grandma across the street. It's respecting one another again. It's helping kids with homework. It's helping single mothers to raise their sons and taking them to the football game so they get to have experiences that they wouldn't get to get. All of that is social justice. And we have to understand that it is not just me and Tyler Perry and Oprah Winfrey and Will Smith and people like that who can do something. Everybody can do something to make this better and close this gap and create dignity, because dignity has nothing to do with money.
Yes, sir.
It has everything to do with what you think of yourself and how you see yourself.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Profound, Bishop, and it's, you spoke to everything I was speaking to in a general sense that we all, you know what I mean, have a role to play and a part to play, and across the board, leveraging everything that you described. Bishop, I can hold you forever. I'm gonna turn you loose.
Yeah, but we got to tell them. We got another conversation. We had to have this conversation because of this this horrific tragedy is breaking news. So we had to do a breaking news conversation. But we got another conversation that you got to hear that's coming up soon. And it is powerful, and it is profound, and it's prolific, and you really need to hear it as we're having a discussion from across generational borders.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Spanning the gulf of time.
Yes, sir.
Finding places of agreement in a way that will stimulate your mind and titillate your senses and hopefully ignite your intellectualism. You've got to be a part of it. Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it. It's been real.
Bishop, we leave it. Anything you want to say, final as we exit, stage left?
I want to assure our people, my great-grandfather died when he was 103 years old. I don't know how old my great-grandmother was, but she was born a slave and she died when I was about 10. I want to assure our people, as horrific and unfair and as unjust as some of the things are that we're dealing with, as frightening and as horrifying as the pandemic is, something that we've not seen in 100 years, our people have survived every atrocity imaginable. And I want to remind you that we are strong and that we are tenacious and that you have your great-grandmother's blood in you and all of the blood of your ancestors surrounds you. And I want you to know that we will rise above this too. And if we stand together, and if we work together, and if we fight together, and if we are not foolish in this pandemic and careless about our own lives, that this will become another part of our story that this generation can contribute. Because until now, our complaints were spoiled, foolish tantrums from people who had endured no pain. But in these recent years, in these recent hours, we have seen something worthy to be written about. And we are strong enough to make it. And by God's grace, and by his mercy, his utter mercy, we will live to tell the story to our children.
Bishop, it's a lot of hurt people. Would you mind saying a quick prayer?
I'd love to.
Yes, sir.
Father, I bow my head to you because I trust you for justice. I know you are the righteous judge. I know that you know how to vindicate even the ungodly. And I ask you for justice. I ask you, Lord, to let justice just roll down like a mighty stream. Let it roll in not only into the crisis of the courtrooms and the processes that we have deliberated about today, but let your mercy go into the hospital rooms where people are stuck on ventilators. Let it go into the hearts of people who are grieving and frustrated. Let your love reach out and wrap its arms around single mothers who lay in the bed at night alone, comforting themselves, holding on to pillows. Let your kindness touch 5-year-old kids growing up in the projects in the hood, that they might get binoculars and see beyond the borders of their demographics. Let your great grace create opportunities for us to see something beyond this present danger. And I thank you, Lord, because you are familiar with suffering. And I thank you because you sent your son to die on a cross, naked, stripped and beaten, and innocently crucified before the world. So when we cry and when we moan, you can be touched by the feeling of our infirmity, because if the priest doesn't get it and the Levite doesn't get it, I know you know what it is to endure suffering unjustly. And so I know you in the fellowship of your suffering and the power of your resurrection. And I thank you because I know if I suffer with you, I'm going to reign with you. Father, let everybody up under the sound of my voice move from the suffering to the reigning, so that it shall be said that the Lord was with us when we passed through the waters and the storms and the flood. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Bishop.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate you.